This BoF Live is brought to you in partnership with DHL, the e-retail and fashion industry's leading global logistics supplier. For decades, DHL has pioneered solutions to meet the needs of designers and retailers alike. Now, through its positive fashion initiatives, it is highlighting the importance of sustainability in the fashion industry. Learn more at dhl.com.
Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome back to BoF Live. I'd like to welcome back both our community members of returning BoF professionals and also our guests from DHL's In Motion channel. Please do feel free to send any questions you have about the topics we're going to discuss today to events@businessoffashion.com, and we'll turn to as many as we can at the end of the session. Today we're discussing logistics, and this talk seeks to identify how small and medium-sized enterprises can begin to reimagine their logistics strategies to mitigate harm. And I'm delighted to be joined by both Emily Bodie and Mirella Muller. Thank you both for your time.
Thanks very much, Robin. Very excited to meet everybody here.
Thank you, Mirella, and thank you, Emily. From identifying common roadblocks and identifying the accessible solutions, we aim to provide immediately actionable insights for both business owners and decision makers to adopt into their daily decision-making processes. I think, as we are all on some level aware, the speed and convenience of delivery windows expected by consumers has become inherently unsustainable. Routes are increasingly atomized through more stops and multiple delivery attempts required for some orders. And the intricacy and density of distribution channels has grown exponentially. I think we may have just lost one speaker, but I will continue as we are, and I'm sure we'll resolve that soon. Richard Wilding, who's a professor of supply chain strategy at the Cranfield School of Management, describes it that the pandemic has given online shopping a significant boost, accelerating its growth, but retailers and their customers must understand the true cost to serve. And so far, few do. Today, as consumer expectations that brands act in a more responsible manner grow, understanding that true cost of service has never been more important. So today we're sharing DHL's global insight on how emerging and established fashion talent can reconsider how they operate, and also sharing Emily Bodie's insight as to how she, as an entrepreneur, a lauded entrepreneur in the space, has approached things from her personal experience. Mirella, just while we work through getting Emily back online, could you share with us all why DHL chose to act so early when it came to thinking about logistics, operations, but business as a whole in a more responsible manner?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, first of all, Robin, for giving us this opportunity. Yeah, I think DHL, as you said before, so we have been committed to partner in the fashion industry for a long time. Yeah, I think we really see the value here, and we have been working in this area for decades together. I think important, as said as well before, is the ongoing boom in e-commerce. Yeah, and I think even due to COVID, this even rapidly has changed over the last couple of months. That of course brings growth in the market, and especially in transportation, and it's a big driver in global trade today. Nevertheless, it's good for our businesses' growth, of course, but we also recognize that these activities have an impact on the environment and on the climate, and that we take that very serious. So first of all, I think important, we as a DPDHL group, we have an ambitious target. We really want to reduce by 2025, well, actually by 2050 on zero emissions. So now everybody can say 2050 is a long way, but our first target is really on 2025 to reduce this to 40% already. We have a lot of targets set for 2025, so we have clear targets for this. I think that's important for the community to understand that it only works when you have a clear plan and clear target. So what does it mean? Yeah, what are we doing? I think maybe to give you some background, the general transportation industry is probably responsible about 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions of the GHG. Yeah? We as DPDHL is about 0.4%. So again, this is why it is also for us so important. So we started in 2007 with a new program, really focusing on Go Green, having different Go Green initiatives. We reduced our emissions since 2007 by 35%. And we keep on really developing and implementing climate and environmental protection measurements. Yeah, and just to give you some examples, because I think for everybody is how do I grip this now? You know, what is there? And some of the things are pretty easy. So it already starts with making sure we have innovative pick up and delivery solutions. Yeah, going to a pack station, going somewhere at your convenience. So we only have one drop off. Yeah, and not have to go 4 or 5 times, but really having that convenience that you can go anytime you would like to pick up your shipment. An example, in Germany, we heavily invested in electric vehicles. 41% of our deliveries are zero emission, so we have over 11,000 electric vehicles. We were planning to increase it to 70% by 2025. We have express city hub solutions where people go out by a bicycle. We're looking at, or we're developing in the air and ocean area how to reduce on the LCL, on the ocean freight shipments, our carbon. How we call it ODD, on-demand delivery, means you as a consumer can just reroute your shipment to any time and point so that it can be delivered at once. And again, we keep on coming back to that topic, that delivering at the convenience and somebody is at home really helps everybody. Yeah? We bought new aircraft. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So I was just going to say, before we get into some of the specific solutions, because I do want to talk about emissions and multimodal transport a little later on in the talk. But just before that, established global leaders like DHL have the resources to execute, big, ambitious, target-driven initiatives. But small and medium-sized enterprises, they are experimental, they are agile, and consequently they drive a lot of change in the industry. And whilst typically, I think SMEs often have little control over the transparency of their supply chains, and it can be hard for even the most committed to make steps in this way forward. Emily, you are in fact a lauded and great exception that proves the rule, and you're very, very close to your supply chain. You created a vertically integrated business. You're not taking outside funding beyond grants and and scholarships, or prizes, I should say. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience of founding your business and how you sort of navigated the first few years?
Yes. Sorry for logging off my computer, kind of did a quick mishap. But yeah, so I launched Bodhi in July of 2016. And to date, we are still self-funded. And in part, we are working with other outside wholesale accounts. We have around 120 accounts now post the initial beginnings of the pandemic, and we have our own store, we have our e-commerce, but in terms of our supply chain and production, we're trying to encourage growth within our own manufacturing and try to be as vertically integrated as possible, as well as through our selling channels. And so when I launched, it was a collection of clothing made primarily from antique textiles, and still today it's around 40% of our business. So it's not just making textile or fashion and clothing from one-of-a-kind vintage materials, but it's also utilizing dead stock and working within our community to access materials that would otherwise be discarded.
When we were chatting before this talk, you kindly shared that at the beginning of your journey as an entrepreneur, you were doing absolutely everything within the business, all the way down the operational chain, and that you created an operational bottleneck that that was solved by, I believe, hiring a very valued member of staff who came in and sort of gave you some processes to shift that bottleneck. That's now evolved slightly further, and you've started measuring the metrics of your business. You've started sort of really considering, certainly in the studio, you mentioned how long things should be taking, where things are going. And it seems, Mirella, as you were saying, data is the first step of understanding the impact of your business. And that data can both inform delivery patterns, it can inform how consumers want their things to be delivered, but it also should inform production and planned transportation, planned supply chains, etc. So Emily, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about which data you've started thinking about collecting and what you like to do with it. And then Mirella, perhaps you can identify some sort of the best practices or best in class examples that DHL is aware of when it comes to starting to collect data analytics.
Yeah, for now, I mean, it's definitely something that we need to invest a bit more into, but we were originally collecting data just on the product itself. So having transparency along the supply chain. I recently won the Walmart Prize Award, which was on innovation and transparency. So measuring data from the start of wool production and through to the finished product. We're also measuring within our studio, which is kind of what you mentioned, based on what our output is. And because we rely so much on our handwork and craft, that it's something that is easily costed when we work with factories and tailors, but when we work to grow our own manufacturing, it's a little bit more difficult. So implementing those processes and procedures has been really valuable and allowed us not to bottleneck in our production. So measuring, how many shirts are cut a day and how long does it take to mend something. So much of our practice has to do with the preservation of these textiles and the preservation of an antique quilt, for example. And if our margins still stand true and are quite good based on how much labor is involved in the preservation of these items.
Mirella, you identified to me, that data is really important to forecast demand and the ability for that to allow you to plan production and transportation ahead of time. Perhaps you could go into a little bit more detail about why that's so important and what the potential positive impacts are if you do that correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that goes across the complete supply chain. Yeah, it starts already with the upstream. So how do you plan your transportation in the best mode when production is ready? Yeah, and that is from an environmental perspective. It depends, of course, how fast the production is. If it's fast fashion or but it starts of how to plan your upstream, how to plan your air freight, your ocean freight, the best route, optimizing. Customs. It goes complete to that. I think especially then, based on arrival, is really route cause optimization. So how to plan the routes to the warehouses, to the shops, how to optimize that. Yeah, we have a company in DHL Green Plan, and we really look at the best algorithms, how really to plan this and to optimize this, again, to reduce emission, crucial. And then it goes to the last mile, how can we reroute the couriers in the best way, to optimize daily the routings, but also how to make sure of when we know people are at home, the best times, the best delivery slots and that. So for everybody from a speed, but especially from an environmental perspective, data planning, absolutely crucial. And we can still do better altogether. Yeah?
Absolutely. I think that's going to be the underlying message throughout. When we think about optimization, and you've mentioned already in this talk, it's come up in all of our meetings before, this idea of ensuring that the delivery of your garment, when it finally reaches the end consumer through e-commerce, that happens on the first possible time is super important. That you create a delivery system which is agile enough and receptive enough to ensure first time delivery. Mirella, do you have any sort of data, and even if it's sort of finger in the wind stuff, as to how important that, or how much potential positive impact could be achieved if all of us did better and all of us achieved a first time delivery every single time, just to give our community a scale of the possible positive impact of all of us doing better together?
I don't have really a number I could give you on that. But I think you can imagine the impact of a driver going instead of 3 times, only 1 time to your house door. Yeah, and just multiply that by the amount of people ordering and living in the country. So I think you can imagine that is just a small part already of the supply chain, but the impact on that, going from 2 delivery attempts to 1 delivery attempt, and just imagine that in the calculations.
We have a long way to go when it comes to how well we can optimize the various systems that connect product to consumers and delivery. But optimization can only go so far. There is increasingly an argument that entrepreneurs such as Emily or businesses as a whole should be leading consumer behavior and not seeking to find competitive advantage by following consumer trend when it comes to delivery windows. And that actually we have experienced almost an arms race when it comes to delivery windows between major businesses that have gone from next day delivery, you know, realistically to next hour delivery if you are in a capital city of a major market. And now, you know, that's fantastic for the convenience of consumers, but it's very difficult to reconcile that convenience with the increasing expectation of customers that businesses do better and that they manage to, you know, really measure the impact they're having. Emily, how do you communicate with your customers when it comes to maintaining the values that underpin your business model that may at times be slightly inconvenient or may at times mean that there isn't another colorway or et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, well, to start, I mean, we had quite a different experience with shipping. We had always had on our website that it would take 2 weeks to even begin to ship your product. And I think that being honest around that, and because we have so much to do with customization and personalization, that when you explain that to the consumer, they don't care as much, right? And they're more forgiving, especially when they hear that, you know, maybe we're doing our own in-house fulfillment, or, you know, we're investing in staff to create a community and of young people to, you know, instead of warehousing at the beginning, right? And I think people are more lenient when the narrative is there. And in terms of, gosh, we definitely bottlenecked with fulfillment for sure, and we're learning a lot right now. But in a way, by doing it in-house, for example, that saved us during the initial pandemic, because we were not reliant on outside companies to make sure that our product could get delivered well, and everyone was solely shopping online. So we didn't owe deposits to a warehouse. We were totally in control on when our employees felt comfortable working, where we could work, and if we could work safely to get the product out. And I think that's really important, instead of maybe jumping on something that is perhaps, you know, a set cost, that we could really grow it ourselves and still hit the right percentage in our margins for something like delivering our product.
Morello, something that struck me was we have experienced, as delivery routes have become atomized, we have experienced this sort of real step forward when it comes to convenience in delivery and you know, how quickly we can get the goods we want. But actually, as urbanization continues and we are in a bit of a lag before the next big technological boom that may impact the delivery of the last mile, it may actually get more challenging to deliver over the last mile. I wondered if you could share anything when it comes to just the shifts of crowded urban centers that you discussed in the DHL white paper.
Yes, absolutely. I think, you know, we need to look at different ways of how to deliver, yeah, and how to optimize that. Also of alternative ways of, like we do, for example, in the Netherlands, yeah, where people hold shipments in their garage, the neighborhood concept. So we need to work more in that way, yeah. Or in Sweden, where we piloted a couple of years ago, maybe too early, yeah, of using people who are driving anyway out on the countryside to take the shipments. And that. So I think we need to look at different models, how that could work. But I think also a little bit to what Emily said before, I think the speed is one thing, and I don't think it's more about finding convenient ways which are sustainable. Yeah, when you anyway walk somewhere, why not taking your shipment with you? Why do it need always to be the doorstep, or, you know? So yes, I think we're all going to be looking at new models and combining that, like we do with having shops and supermarkets where you can pick it up, or really put it more in your daily lifestyle and reducing in that way also the impact on the environment.
Could you share more a little bit about what the neighborhood strategy was in, I believe you said, the Netherlands? If that sounds
Yes, my home country. Yeah, no, I think that's, for example, where you look at that, it's using really, you know, how life works. So where we have people in the street who say, I have a garage, often retired people, for example, or people being at home, what is a select drop points for us. And if you then order something, you can just give that to the select drop points. And for this, for example, this gentleman opens his garage. It's all, of course, scanned. It's all in the system. But you can go there at your convenience in the evening, just in the corner of the street, for example. And I think these are the type of things we need to start looking into. And I think everybody is happy with that. It's somebody who helps us of being that collection point in the neighborhood. At the same time, it keeps the family who's working the convenience to pick it up. And again, we can reduce cars driving around because you just go to one point instead of to 20 or 30 house doors.
Moving on slightly to sort of similarly rethinking about how we can localize supply, I guess. And you know, Emily, you have a very specific product that you're seeking around the world in terms of the dead stock and antique fabrics that are going to work for your business and your aesthetic. And so as a result, you have a very specific supply chain. But by and large, it seems that really looking at last minute on-demand production and really thinking about how businesses can move both their stock and their supply in a more localized fashion seems to be one of the key areas that a lot of people are exploring. Emily, could you maybe give me any sort of backgrounds or thoughts you've had on reshoring any supply you have, despite you know obviously there are challenges in where you can get your product?
Yeah, well, so the antique aspect of our business is around 40%, and we also do a lot of domestic manufacturing in India and Peru. Most of these companies have a rural social good component, but in New York, there is that ease of being able to put in product and have a very fast turnaround, and especially with the investment of our own manufacturing. I'm trying to think like if there's something, you know, from a sustainability perspective and in terms of having a quick turnaround, we work quite a bit with jobbers, and that has become a big part of our business model, and being able to assess where we can get stock and where we can get stock, whether that means, you know, hundreds of yards, thousands of yards, or really just for, you know, custom product, and looking towards some tried and true family owned businesses here in New York has been really helpful, you know, as a company that's growing.
Mirella, how significant do you think nearshoring of fashion suppliers could be on a global level, given DHL's sort of bird's eye view?
I think it's, of course, at the end, it's also related to cost. Yeah, I think that's also what we said in the beginning when you opened. You know, I think everybody has a stake in this, but it doesn't come for free. You know, yeah. I do think nearshoring is important, and I think that's what a lot of companies are looking at for different reasons, from environmental perspective, but also having different based on, you know, due to the COVID situation, everybody learned, you know, to look different at their supply chain. So I think nearshoring, but also I think Emily said as well, to have your stock closer, probably, yeah, more regionalized. So I think that's an important one. Why fly every single shipment over, yeah? But maybe have it in a consolidated warehouse closer to a certain market, like in the EU, yeah, where you have a warehouse in a European location, you can serve out of there a lot of countries or customers in that, yeah. So yes, we do think nearshoring is a big topic. And we need also to look out based on that on alternative transportation modes, which I think is also one of the topics. Yeah, multimodal transportation, alternatives to air. But definitely nearshoring is what we see happening more and more, and also important to adapt to the challenges we're currently all facing.
Just before we move on to emissions and multimodal transportation and and also rationalizing some of the packaging that's involved in the fashion business. Emily, you're in the process of, or forgive me, but I believe you've launched and you're in the process of growing what you intend to be a very scalable repair, tailoring, and reuse business. And I know that repair and mending is already a part of your business, and it's already something that you do, but that you really see your ability to grow that part of the business in addition for your ability to sell new product to existing or new consumers. How are you approaching that kind of operational complexity when there is going to be a number of touch points with the customer that you can train their behavior, as it were? But tell me any thoughts you've had thus far.
Well, so we opened our store in November, and it's become quite apparent that people are interested in the idea of repair and the idea of tailoring even upon their first purchase of the garment. So we offer that, free of charge to tailor your garment, on the spot. But we also are looking towards figuring out the best possible way to offer repairs in the future. By offering it in the store, it does bring people back into the shop, and that's a very important part of our community that we're building, and it allows for an extended product life cycle. So we want people to invest in their clothing and continue to have our flagship store as a place to really interact with our brand and interact with our staff, as well as future product that we offer.
Sure. Thank you. Moving now to packaging, which is probably one of the areas that I think consumers find it most easy to understand. It's for a while now, a number of major e-commerce businesses have offered sustainable packaging. It was one of the first things to go, I think, in terms of how consumers were interacting with fashion with fashion delivered through e-commerce. Mirella, DHL has done quite a lot in this area in terms of supporting the experimentation around alternative materials and thinking about how we can remove unnecessary packaging throughout the supply chain all the way down. Can you share with the community what the principles they should adopt, or what the key principles to having a rational packaging strategy for whatever type of business you're in?
Yeah, I think the different elements of that. I think first of all, the material you are using, and we all know you order something online, can you use it again for returns? So look at the material, apart from being recycled material, is it stable? Can you use it again? So really limited how much packaging we use. Look at the filling material. I think you also all know that you get a big box and there's something small in there. There are two elements of that. If it is packed wrong, it damages during transportation. You can't reuse the box. So look at the material, look at the size, look that you can reuse it. We are continuously going into workshop with our customers of identifying new packaging materials, new ways of using cages, reusing cages. So looking at packaging, it's not only the last mile, but also in the transportation mode across the world, of how to optimize that, use recycled materials, reduce plastic. It's really something also SMEs can really influence themselves. So check what is the material, but please make sure you pack it right and that you can reuse it. And also the filling material you are using, these are easy things you can influence, and it really brings a big extra effort. And we continuously work, we have a whole development group of looking at new way of packaging, new packaging materials. So for us, this is really an ongoing development in every part of the supply chain.
You mentioned just at the end there the supply chain, and how have you seen retailers or brands, or you may not be privy to these conversations, but it's interesting to think about the influence the retailers and brands can have up the supply chain, and how they can influence how their goods are delivered to them before they retail them. Do you have any advice or any awareness you can share with the kind of packaging that might be involved in the shipping process from production and manufacturing centers to brands and retailers in their retail locations.
Robin, you were breaking away for a moment. Can you just repeat the question once again? Sorry, or just, yeah.
Sorry, Mirella. I didn't ask it very clearly either, so I'll try and do better.
No, I was just gone for a moment, that's all.
I think often we as an industry and as a community we think about packaging as the journey from shop to consumer, or from distribution center to consumer. And actually, all the product that is being shipped from production centers and manufacturing hubs around the world is being packaged to be delivered to the retailers or to the brands. And I wondered if there was anything you could share in terms of awareness of how much that packaging might have an impact, or why it's important for retailers and entrepreneurs to really discuss with their partners what packaging is being used for their goods to be delivered to them before they eventually reach the end consumer.
Yeah, so I don't have really figures on that, but for sure we can share it if somebody is interested in more detail. But yes, I agree. So if you look the amount of plastic to wrap pallets, the material used there, I think we have no idea how big that is. So it really starts with looking, how are your suppliers packaging, wrapping, how are they wrapping, Can we use alternative materials to reduce the plastics there? What type of pallets, what type of material are they using at that part of the supply chain? How do they load containers in that way? And it starts right there, how is material packed there? So it's really looking at the beginning, how to optimize that to, take out any volume, any air, but also really the materials used in that part. And I think we underestimate the amount of plastic and pallets and material used there.
Just before we move on to emissions and multimodal transportation, which is obviously a key element of this conversation, Emily, you have been celebrated in the industry, both because of your designs, but also because of your business model. And as a result, not to put too much pressure on you, I believe you are one of the emerging SMEs in the fashion industry that is probably most capable of expecting their partners to act in a certain way, or of encouraging the businesses that they interact with to follow the values that your business is founded on. Now, I know that you're vertically integrated, and obviously potentially for that reason. However, is there any tips you can share with the community about how they can encourage the partners that they are working with, the businesses that are part of their overall business, to do better, to reconsider their models or their operations?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, whatever we request of our stockists has to be already implemented within our own business. So when we, go to request them to maybe use less plastic or not use boxes that have garment, wardrobe boxes, so that you're not shipping hangers, for example. But we have to already implement some of these practices within our own business, or even from we just recently requested our businesses to sign on to the 15% pledge. So, it has to be a part of your mission statement, as well as, when we're working with our factories in India, requesting that we're not shipping plastic back and forth with our factories only to then repackage them in plastic and then ship them to our stockists, right? And I think, it's just important to have it as part of your brand narrative before you then try to encourage others to participate.
Thanks. Mirella, moving on to multimodal transport, which you mentioned right at the beginning of the chat when we were talking in your introduction, and why it's so important. And you just mentioned again removing air freight where possible, and we've touched upon this a number of times in terms of creating data sets so you can better plan ahead. But can you tell our community and tell the community why, what kind of advantages can come from really having a focus on multimodal transportation, and what are the steps that entrepreneurs should think about, or SMEs should think about, when they start working towards being able to use multimodal transportation as opposed to what might be more standard now?
Yeah, I think of course it depends a little bit of how fast your collections are. Yeah, and I think looking to the community here, I think also looking at, if you look at more high-end fashion, it's not that every couple of days it needs to be something new out there. So that's of course drives the model as well. But I think if you plan the production, if you plan your transportation the right way, why not going by rail? Yeah, why not using a mix of air and rail or air and road? Why not using ocean? Where I think we need to understand in what depends on the segment you operate in, but we don't need to fly everything. Yeah, there are really different mixes, but also being smart of flying maybe the first part on the route and then to truck, for example. Yeah. And I think we as a company have been looking more and more in alternative models, yeah, using now, for example, trains and trucks out of China into Europe, yeah, where I think for a couple of months, people were not considering. Now, I think this is really of planning right, yeah, and I think for an SME, that's also learning going through that, how to plan my production depending on the countries. I think we also are now in a challenging situation due to COVID, based on capacity. That also drives us to look at alternative models. But we do think that multimodal and combining solutions is the way forward. And we successfully piloting that with quite some large fashion players. So definitely yes. Which comes back again of also looking of where to keep your stock. Yeah. So look also on more regionalized type of stock taking models.
One thing that goes hand in hand with considering emissions and multimodal transportation is targets, and certainly for larger SMEs, but also for SMEs that expect that are answering calls from consumers to be better at reporting their impact. Mirella and Emily, I will come back to you in a second, but Mirella, can you talk to me a little bit about why science-based targets are so important, and some of the ways that DHL has considered, what kind of initiatives they sign up for, what kind of major emissions do you track, and why have you chosen those, and why is it important that the industry gets around those specific targets?
Well, I think if you set a target like we do, and if you have such a big impact in a branch like ours on emission, you need to set clear targets to follow that. And I think what we did in these targets, the CEOs of each of the DPDHL business units, as you know, we are quite a large company with going from warehousing to last mile transportation to air freight and road freight, so all different elements. And you need to set really clear targets on your emission to measure, to improve, to keep the pressure on, and also really to keep the investments and developments going. Also to drive the industry together with the other players of finding alternative fuels. So the measurements and the targets are absolutely crucial to drive this forward, and also to show the impact we're having. As I said, we started in 2007, and now we reduced our emission by 35%. Being such a big stakeholder in this discussion, it is absolutely crucial, and all companies need to do this. For the SMEs, I think it's important, and I think that's also what we mentioned in our white paper, which we did with the British Fashion Council, is to have really a checklist how they can do that, yeah, of how can they check across the supply chain they are having, of how their partners and their suppliers are working on us. Have they set clear targets? What are the measurements against that? So I think we all have a stake in that, of also challenging our suppliers and our partners on this. So that comes back, that can only be done if you really have a clear strategy, clear measurements. That's why we do our CO2 reporting, for example, and that's why we have a complete dedicated team in our corporate development for this topic.
Emily, how did you approach measuring emissions, or choosing which targets to share, and how to approach it in your business?
So as of now, we're mostly sharing that through more of a storytelling or narrative around our fabrication. So if we take something like Khadi, which has a historical narrative about India and bringing the economy back into the hands of the craftspeople and of Indians, and then looking at that also from a sustainability perspective in terms of our environment and how that has a zero carbon footprint, and really explaining that to our customers. that is how we're, sharing those metrics, right? But it's more so as a story, and as well as, the preservation of craft and the preservation of antique textiles. So it's not just, keeping things out of a landfill, but also keeping the history alive and the narrative alive, to prolong the life cycle of products and to allow people to hold on to things just a bit longer. And we haven't partnered with any company in particular. We've definitely looked at, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and how they're calculating metrics, with their Higg index, and looking at how to implement those numbers in our, the next stage of growth.
We've only just got a couple more minutes of time, so we have time for 2 questions. The first is from our community, and they've asked, what is the first thing that you would do starting tomorrow? And it's a big question, but I wondered if, and they've shared that they care very much about this area, but they haven't yet started. How would you advise an SME to just take that first step of pen to paper starting tomorrow? Maybe Emily, we can start with you, and then Mirella will get back to you.
Oh gosh, I don't know. Maybe let's switch. Mirella,
sure.
Do you want to start first?
How to start doing it? Yes, I'm happy to pick that up if you want.
Please.
Yeah, well, again, take that checklist, which we have in the white paper. It really, really will help you sit down, really go through different elements. Yeah, it's not only about logistics, it goes across all the elements. And you will be surprised to see this by, understanding your supplier strategy, looking at your packaging, looking also, there are elements which we had a chance today not to talk about, but how to do return management, how to improve that, circular environment. I thought Emily mentioned before, what I thought was great, going back to the shop of getting things repaired. So why not look at it that you get things sent back to you and repair it? Yeah. So I think there are small steps to be taken. Look at your suppliers, look at your packaging, look at, is it really speed or is it more flexibility where the customers can pick up their shipment? Really reduce plastics. I think there are loads of materials you can use as alternatives. Make sure packaged material can be reused. And I think that's already easy steps to take and to start the discussion, absolutely.
And just before we turn to Emily, we'll make sure that checklist appears in our write-up of today's conversation, and there'll be a link to the DHL white paper. So anyone that wants to learn more can do so through that. But Emily, what are your tips to start?
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up, would be to continue close communication with your customers, because we were seeing that people were getting their clothes tailored and repaired, but that they'd rather have it through us, of course, from the source. And that only happens with really good communication from a customer service perspective, as well as, understanding that some of our customers would be put off by having their product shipped in plastic, right? So of course there's much larger partners of ours that have to ship in this method, but if we can bring back some of that shipping and fulfillment into our own centers, then we could really have from product development into end product to our customer in the exact way that we want it, in the most sustainable option available.
My final question, this one's to you, Mirella, is what's one good solution to offer customers a competitive advantage in the logistics? I think, sorry, and to clarify that, it's interesting that we used to think of competitive advantage of speed to consumer. There were a number of different things that could really distinguish you, but as we've discussed throughout this conversation, consumer attitudes are changing, the approach that should be taken. So what do you think is going to build competitive advantage in the near to mid-term?
Well, I think Emily made a good point. First of all, is communication, understand what your consumers and your customers really want, yeah? So having this direct contact to your customers, what they really want, it's definitely not always speed. I think we all got in this attitude, it needs to be fast. So understand what your customer really wants. Give them options at the checkout. Yeah, I think really the customer should decide. Yeah, does he want to have it early, or does he want to have it in the more economical, slower mode? So give options at your checkout. Give go green options at your checkout. Yeah, so give them, if a consumer, and that's where it starts. And I think you mentioned that in the beginning. It doesn't happen without cost and change, yeah, and it needs to be carried somewhere, and that is something we own all together, including the end customer, the consumer. So look at your checkout, look at different partners and checkout options. Leave the flexibility to your consumers where they want to have it delivered, because you do reduce their the cost, but you make your customer happy when they can have it at their convenience, at their point, and with the logistics partner they want to have. Yeah, and so I have a DHL pack station on the corner of the street, and I want everything there. Yeah, I don't want to go to the other part of the city because I'm not always at home. Yeah, so look at that, look at your checkout, and talk to your customers what is really, really important, and give them options. That would be my main message.
That's a fantastic message for us to close on. Mirella, Emily, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with our community. I certainly appreciate it, and I'm sure they will. I hope you have a lovely remainder of your days. Thank you again.
Thank you, and all the best to Emily. Great business content, really love it.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Have a lovely day. Thank you all for joining. We'll be back next week with we'll be back next week with more BoF Live. So do check it out then. Thank you.